Welcome, everyone. Today's guest I was super excited for, and it was an honor to be able to chat with him. I'm talking about Mr. Greg Keyes, the author of the Star Wars New Jedi Order series, duology, Conquest and Rebirth, and then later on, the Final Prophecy. Let me tell you, this gentleman is highly creative and very talented when it comes to writing sci fi and fantasy. Our conversation was so much fun. We get some insight on what it was like working on this project, amongst other things. At the latter part of our stream, we'll say there was a little bit of disruption. I think the Yuuzhan Vong were trying to upset this whole process. But don't mind that. Mr. Key still sounds great. I hope you enjoy this. Again, I want to thank you for your support. It means the world to me. And without further ado, Mr. Greg Keyes. Crisp and good. Yeah,
All right.
honestly, I'm really excited to talk with you, Mr. Keyes.
Oh, well, thank
For
you.
yeah, for a few reasons actually.
Mhm.
One, you're highly creative. You've got a great list of accomplishments and achievements that you've done. I mean, fantasy, sci-fi, movie novelizations, video game novelizations. But you're the first author that I get to speak to that actually worked on the new Jedi Order series for Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which I'm currently reading through for the first time.
Where are
So
you at this point?
I just finished Dark Journey by Miss
Okay.
Elaine Cunningham. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I got to tell you, when I got there was the start off was great, and then there was a couple lull, nothing bad, but just I wasn't feeling it, and then I hit Conquest, and it was like ignited that fire again to really get in deep with the series.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have a book club that I do with a few friends in town, and they're reading it for the first time as well, and we get together once a week and talk about it, and they felt the same thing. So I just wanted to point that out. Like your novel really, it was great. It was it was fantastic. There was so much happening, and it was like an Anakin eccentric novel. So we get a little
Right.
backstory with him and follow them. But before we get into that, I mean you got a history behind you. I mean, you got a degree in anthropology, which
Hmm.
is
That's correct.
very impressive, very interesting too. And also, you're a fencer.
I am. Yeah. Yeah. I've been fencing since like the late 90s, I guess. I didn't start when I was a kid, which is when most people would start.
Right, right.
Would be the ideal time to start, right? Because if you're going to win the Olympics, you're going to start when you're 7 and you're going to win the Olympics when you're 17 and then you're going to be done. But I grew up in Meridian, Mississippi, where there was no fencing of any sort. So when I was living in Seattle um, back in the late 90s, I started fencing there as actually as research for a book. But then I really got into it and ended up not only competing, but coaching. And coaching is what I mostly do now.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. Um, it shows too in your work that you can tell with certain authors when they write scenes that are some sort of battle. Like you can tell they have a mindset of how the movements are performed, and it really stands out to me as well. Because I took a little taekwondo. I mean, now there's all sorts of different types of martial
Sure.
arts and mixed martial arts. It's a whole vast. It's grown huge compared to what it used to be.
Well, what was available to me in Meridian, Mississippi was Shotokan. So I took
Oh,
Shotokan as a teenager, um, like late. I guess I started when I was about 11 or 12, and I did that for a few years. And I competed in that too. So that
really?
was sort of prior to my fencing experience.
Have you always had the drive to perform some kind of combat sport? Like, was there some interest when you were a kid that a movie or something that kind of turned you onto
Uh,
it?
well, I was reading science fiction and fantasy. So on one level, I think when you're a kid and you read that stuff, in the back of your mind, you think, well, one day I'm going to need those skills too, right? Like one day I'm going to end up in Narnia or something,
Yeah.
and I'll need to know how to fence or fight with my hands. Um, so I think there was that. There was because I started reading science fiction first, but I started reading that in like second grade, right?
Mm.
So, and you know, on another level, when I got to high school, um, I I had a tendency to get in fights anyway, and I think looking back on it, one of the reasons I took Shotokan was to try to control my
Mm.
temper, like control this tendency I had to get into fights. You know, and back then, and when and where I grew up, you could get in a fight at school and there would be no consequences other than
Yeah, no
what. I
repercussions.
mean, I got in a fight right in the middle of ninth grade science, and nothing ever, you know, other than us being eventually separated.
Yeah, yeah.
There was no visit to the principal. There was no expulsion. There was no. I'm not saying this is a good thing. It's just the way it was.
Right.
Yeah, it was like kind of like Lord of the Flies. So I think part of that Shotokan thing was I wanted some discipline. I felt like I needed some discipline.
Yeah. And that's a
So
good thing you can get from that is how to
right,
control yourself. It's more a mental thing too. It's not just learning how to
sure,
fight, how to
absolutely,
control that inner energy, and that's a good thing. And I think kids nowadays should take some sort of a martial art, not for the fact to learn how to fight, but just to learn how to be a more gentle human being.
right, yeah, and you
Yeah.
know, fencing it's not exactly that, but it's similar. You know, fencing is a solitary sport. It's just you and the other person. It's really all about you. You know,
Right.
whether you're in control of yourself or not. And it's not like baseball when you miss a pop fly and the whole team hates you, right? It's just like, well, if you screw up, that's you, you know.
Yeah. It's on you.
So
I saw one of your videos when you were competing, and I gotta say you're pretty quick. You got some feints and some.
is this the French one? The
I believe
um,
so. Yeah.
yeah, that's actually an interesting thing, and it's obviously an aside. But I was actually in France in a place called Epinal um, for a convention. I was invited over there because my books are pretty popular in France. Actually, especially my original work, right? And so I was invited over there for something called the Imaginals, which is pretty fantastic. It was like this big science fiction convention,
Mm.
and somebody had gotten wind of the fact that I fenced. And the other guy in the video is actually a guy named Laurent Gijon, who is also a French science fiction fantasy author and also a fencer. And somebody thought it would be a fun idea for us to fence. And so I was like, oh, yeah, okay, you know, and they said, just bring your shoes, we'll supply everything else. And the weapon we're fencing is actually epee, which is not the thing I fence. I usually fence foil, and
Foil.
I
Yeah.
won't go
Yeah.
into the differences here, um, but so they set us up, they took us to a club and they filmed it, and it was actually on local like television as like France versus the United States.
Oh wow.
And I mean, Laurent was perfectly wonderful guy. There was no animus there, but but on the local television, it was kind of like, you know, like one of us had challenged the other or
Yeah.
something, you know,
Made
and
a big deal out of it.
yeah, it was kind of made a big deal of it. Um, but yeah, it was fun anyway. It was, if you're a fencer, you know, getting to fence in France is a really pretty cool thing. So,
Yeah.
um,
That's a bonus.
but I'm fencing him like a foilist, which confused him, which is why I don't know if you can even tell I did win the bout, but it was mostly because it was only a 5 touch bout. We were only going to 5, and he couldn't figure out what I was doing fast enough because I wasn't doing what he was used to.
Used to their style. Right.
Yeah, if we'd fenced to 15, there's every chance he would have won, or if we had fenced again to 5. But
Okay.
he just didn't quite know what I was doing. I was doing a lot of infighting. I was getting in close,
Yeah.
which is what a short guy does anyway, which is what
Well,
I am. So.
yeah, and you're quick though. I mean, you were hitting low and going high, and yeah, I know there's 3 different styles, 3 different disciplines to it.
Mm.
Do you practice all them, or do you have to pick a specific, the foil or
So
FA
there's
or
foil.
sabre?
There's there's foil and there's epee, and I fenced both of those. Even though in my competing days I was really mostly a foilist. And then there's saber, which is the one weapon of the three that has a theoretical edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I fenced that, but I didn't train in it. I don't coach it. I coach the other two. And in fact, one of my most successful students was an epéist who placed in a satellite World Cup. This has been many years back, but this was a young woman who was like 5 foot tall and 78 pounds.
Jeez.
And I worked left-handed, and I worked with her on epée. So yeah, saber is the one though that I think that if I had a lightsaber, I would fence it the way people fence saber.
Mm.
Because if you're talking about sort of a more or less weightless blade, that's what modern saber is. It's a really, really light weapon. It's got a theoretical edge, so you can cut with it as well as poke. And some of that did carry over to Conquest. And in fact, there's a move that I not invented. There's a move in foil fencing called the flick, which was invented by the Russian team decades ago now, but it was still relatively new when I was fencing. And the flick recognizes that the foil is really, really bendy. So you can kind of go like this and make the weapon's tip bend all the way around and hit somebody in the back.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought, when I was writing Conquest, I thought, well, you could totally do that with an amphistaff, right? Because they can be rigid, they can be, fluid, they can be anything in between. So I had some of the people with amphistaffs doing flicks.
Yeah, I noticed that. That's an interesting weapon. The whole Vong, which we can get into, that whole Yuuzhan Vong, it's got to be if not the best series in Star Wars to a lot of folks, a lot of
Right.
readers. Like and I'm seeing that now for the first time. I just started this journey going on, not to jump off the subject of fencing, but
oh well, no, we're really on Star Wars, right? So go ahead.
yeah, but so I just started really learning about the expanded universe in the books 2.5 years ago. Like I knew there were books, right? Growing up as a kid, I was more into the toys and the films and stuff. Read a couple one-offs here and there. So I've been like reading Star Wars heavy for the last 2.5 years.
Right.
And when I got into doing the YouTube deal, the people I was listening to always talked about it. So I'm like, but they're like, you got to read some of these other books because they start making references and tie-ins, and I'm starting to see that. So now finally I'm on the new Jedi Order series. And like I said, it's been amazing. And then there was a little dip for me. Nothing against the authors, because there's a bunch of talented people that are involved in this project. And then we get to yours, and it was so darn exciting. It was fun, a lot of stuff. And I mean, I would assume from your background with anthropology and other things, like you really liked that, because the Vong have like different layers to them, right? Their society, their culture, everything about them is different. But how did you initially get involved in this project? Like how did this whole process start for you?
Well, so my first novel was a book called The Waterborne, which was published in 1996 and was published by Random House, and specifically by their Del Rey imprint. And so I wrote that. I wrote the sequel to it. They bought and published both. And then I was also writing a series called The Age of Unreason. And around that time, Del Rey acquired the license to do the Star Wars books, right? Okay. So it was a publisher that was familiar with me. They knew I could meet a deadline. They liked the way I wrote. And they were trying something new. They were recruiting people that had not otherwise done Star Wars, right? They were recruiting people who had made names for themselves writing original work or doing something else.
Okay.
And at the time they first mentioned Star Wars to me, I was just really, really busy with some other things. I wasn't entirely sure, to be honest, that I wanted to do franchise work because I was doing okay. I mean, I was a huge Star Trek fan, Star Wars fan. Don't get me wrong. First saw that movie in A New Hope in ninth grade, and it was a movie I had been waiting to see all my life, right?
Perfect timing.
And my brother and I, less than a week later, were wailing away on each other with lightsabers made out of wooden dowels, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I was a big Star Wars fan. But I was a little intimidated by it because there were already a bunch of books in the expanded universe written by really authors that people really loved, right? Like Zahn, like Stackpole. And so I was a little intimidated to get involved. So I actually took a pass on the first time I was offered it. And then I ended up doing some books for a television show called Babylon 5,
Oh, yeah.
which I was also a big fan of. And at the time, I thought it was the best science fiction show on television. I was really happy to write those books. It was a good experience. And so when Star Wars came back around, I was like, okay, maybe I'm ready for this. Maybe I can do this. So one of the editors that knew me, that I'd met a few times, asked me if I would be interested again, and I said yes. And by that time, they had plotted out the general story arc of the new Jedi Order. And so what they did was they said, well, here's your piece of it. What will you do with that? So, I had a general idea of what the arc was about. I knew what had happened up until then. Then I wrote basically outlines for what I would do for Conquest and Rebirth, which I got the contract for those at the same time. Yeah. And, we went through several rounds of that. Well, that won't work, or this will work, or, there was a process that involved me and involved the editor at Del Rey, who was Shelley Shapiro. It involved Sue Rostoni, who was the person who was our contact with Lucasfilms. She was the person that vetted all of the book stuff at the time. So it was and at times we actually consulted with some of the other authors too. Another thing that happened there was that I had not read everything that had been published up until then in the expanded universe. I'd read the first few, I read some here and there, but especially after I started writing, I stopped reading so much fiction because I felt like I should be writing instead of reading. And when I did read, I tended to read for research.
Yeah.
So this sort of goes to the intimidation factor. So when I agreed to do it, I was friends with Michael Stackpole. I had run into him a number of times at conventions, and we'd had some good conversations. And he wrote the Rogue Squadron books, which a lot of people really, really liked. They were really good books. And I said, Mike, what do I absolutely have to read before I start this? And he gave me a list. He says, you have to read this, you have to read this. I had to read, for instance, the first Thrawn book. So I read as much as I could, given the deadline that I had, so that I would have a background on what was going on, like who these characters were. So many of those characters, like Mara Jade, for instance, Corran Horn, they're not in the movies, right? So
right.
Background in the movies is not sufficient to write in the expanded universe. So that was fun. It was fun coming up to speed on all that, and then I wrote the books.
Jumped right into it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's good. Yeah, it seems like there was some good support there. I was curious if they sent you an outline of, okay, here's what our plans are. This is what we plan to do. Where do we go from here? So
right, I knew. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I knew what had. I mean, I read the books that were already published, right? Yeah. So and I knew what was going to happen in the books after mine. So I knew what I was setting up, right? Not in extreme detail, but I knew what I was setting up, which I don't. Anyway, uh, there's some spoilers there that I won't go into, but unless you want to.
No, we
Um,
can. We can. I
but
read them. I just haven't read Final Prophecy. So that like that.
right, so I knew, for instance, that Anakin was going to die.
Yeah.
So my job was to make him look like he was going to be the new Luke, right? And really set him up for success. And then I knew that somebody else was going to kill him.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, for instance, what would happen to Tahiri. And Tahiri was a character I completely, I'd read some of the Junior Jedi books and the Jedi Academy books and so forth that Kevin Anderson
Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, well, where's Tahiri? Like, I mean, that was his best friend. I mean, I realized those were kid books, but she should be here somewhere.
Right.
So I was kind of responsible for pulling her into it, and I think that she became a good character. She ultimately became this sort of tragic, powerful character. So I was really happy about that. Like what eventually went on with her.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was. I had no idea Anakin died. I mean, obviously I read Star by Star now, but I was in the middle of reading that and I had a conversation with a friend and he kind of spoiled it for me.
Right.
But it happened shortly after in the book
Sure.
to where I was at. So I was like, oh, okay, darn. Because I don't want to hear anymore. Like I knew Chewbacca before I started reading them because that was kind of a big news that he died in Victor Prime. But Anakin in this book, like, yeah, he really stood out. Like he disobeyed Luke and went off to try to save everyone on Yavin 4. Tahiri, that whole with her and the Shapers was wild. Like
I think that's one of the reasons they wanted me for those books with my anthropological background.
Yeah.
Because they wanted me to do something that hadn't really been done yet with the Yuuzhan Vong. First of all, to create a character that's somewhat relatable. Like Ninyam's not in any way an unalloyed villain, right? Ninyam has an agenda. She's got her own stuff, but hopefully at times you root for her a little bit. And also Vua Rapung, the guy that teams up with Anakin, right? But I was the first one that got to explore the Shaper cast, and that was extremely interesting to me. To be able to sort of draw on that background, my anthropological background, to sort of to come up with this cast and how they related to the rest of the Yuuzhan Vong world. Because up to then we only seen really the worst, like sadists in that whole culture, right? Like the worst, like sadomasochists, like the warrior types and the religious types that weren't. They're just villains, right? There's nothing okay about them.
Yeah, the Shapers were just. It was kind of eerie too of what they did to Tahiri. Yeah, like
Right.
So did you come up with that whole plan to implement that on your, like, kind of show them like, hey, this is what I'm thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I outlined it. I didn't just write it because I might have been asked to replace it or write something different. So I did outline it. But like I said, Tahiri was not going to be in the New Jedi Order until I started saying, well, why isn't she?
Yeah.
And then it just kind of followed from there, like what happened to her with them.
Yeah, the same. You mentioned Vua Rapung there, bringing him in to work with Anakin. Like, I didn't see that coming at all. That was very interesting.
Yeah.
Is he someone?
At that point, I think it was time to start seeing the Vong as something more than one dimensional. So.
Right. Break it down. Yeah, it seems the further along in the series, it gets more complex with them. Like they unveil more of kind of what they are and what their purpose is, rather than just ruthless villains that come in and pillage everything.
And they have factions; they're not all in agreement, right?
Right.
So, just like the Republic. I mean, So, but anyway, yeah, that was actually a lot of fun. That's kind of what sold me, to a certain extent, on the idea of doing those books, that I would get to do that. You know, that I could have. I always, any book I write, no matter what it is, no matter whether it's one of my original works or Star Wars or whatever, I really want to do the best job that can be done in the time given. Right? I don't want to write a bad book. That doesn't mean
Right.
I haven't, but I don't want to.
Right.
And I always want to do my source material justice if I can. And the more excited I can get about it, the easier that is. And it
Yeah.
was really easy to get excited about those books.
Yeah. Well, I can see why. And it's good that you're meticulous with what you do, because I mean, you should. And if you're going to put work and effort into something, you should take the time to do a little research to try to make the best piece that you can. Now, you mentioned earlier in the ninth grade, you went and seen the film when it came out in theaters, right?
Sure.
Like, what was that experience like for you at that age, being in that environment with everyone?
I mean, so I was already a big fan of science fiction and fantasy, and I was already mostly disappointed with what I had seen in terms of movies, right? Now, the 70s actually produced, I mean, I was born in 1963, right? So it's really in the 70s when I start really paying attention to things, right?
Yeah.
And so there were some good, there's 2001, which is a great film, but that's late 60s. And then there are films like Silent Running, and there are a fair amount of science fiction that gets done in the 70s, and some of them are really good, but they were all kind of downers. They're all dystopian. They all mostly had bad endings, right? And what they weren't at all was, they weren't adventures. They were, with few exceptions, they weren't adventures that you can enjoy. There was something you maybe made you think, made you appreciate them, but they weren't fun, right? And I was a kid. I mean, I was still a kid, and Star Wars, drawing on that old serial material, was just, it was awe-inspiring. I'd never seen effects like that. Nobody had.
No.
When that first ship just comes over and just keeps going and going, I was aware that I was smiling ear to ear, and I was going to keep smiling ear. I mean, it was just such a great opening. Like, I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome, and it was. And there was nothing about that movie I didn't like. So it was a great experience. And like I said, I got a brother that's 2 years younger than me. And we went home and we got these big, heavy wooden dowels from a hardware store, I guess. And we made lightsabers, and we were whacking each other with those.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was appealing to me in every way. And then, there was a spate of, it caused a sea change. I mean, I don't think that the Indiana Jones movies would have happened probably without Star Wars.
Right.
And
I agree.
And those are also movies that I loved for a lot of the same reasons, right? I mean, there was, and there was also a lot of okay, so and actually bad movies that were generated by that same impetus, but that was okay too. You can sort through them.
Yeah.
So it completely changed how science fiction and fantasy happened outside of books.
Yeah. I was born in 84. My dad was born in 62. He's never really been big into movies, so I learned about him growing up. My aunt worked at a video store, and it was cool because we got to see a lot of like screeners and stuff and good old VHS tapes, right? But
Sure.
so prior to the film, you've always been a fan of science fiction. Did that stem from the books, like reading books as a kid, or was?
Yeah, I grew up basically in two places. I grew up in rural Mississippi,
Yeah.
and for a time we lived in rural Arizona, northern Arizona, on the Navajo Nation. Both of these were places where, and we didn't have a lot of money. And we, for the most part, didn't have television. And if we did have television, we don't only pick up one station. So I was big into reading. Like my family was, libraries were really important to me. Like on the reservation, the library was actually a bookmobile, right? That would show up every couple of weeks and you would change out your books. And before I could read, my mother read to me. And for whatever reason, what she mostly read to me were books about science, or fantastic tales, science fiction. Now, I think at some point I started demanding those. Like I wanted books about space stations and books about space travel, and there were plenty of that because that was right in the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo missions. I actually managed to watch the moon landing with my father in Flagstaff, Arizona, in a common area in a dorm. My dad was going back to school. So we watched it on a television, a black and white TV with like 40 other people.
Wow.
And that's how I saw the moon landing. I was 6, right? But that stuff was all extremely interesting to me. And really early on, I mostly read science fiction. It was not until I was maybe 11 or 12, and I accidentally picked up a copy of one of Tolkien's books because I thought it was science fiction, but because of the cover, it looked really science fiction-y. It was weird cover. And by the time I realized I was reading fantasy, it was like, okay, but I got to find out what happens here.
Yeah.
It was funny because it was the 3rd book. It was Return of the King.
Really?
Like, yeah, it wasn't even the first book, but I caught on to what was happening well enough that I got really, really interested in it. And so from then on, I read more a mixture of fantasy and science fiction.
Sci-fi. Yeah. Well, they're kind of you can kind of intertwine them.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a
I
sense.
think Star Wars does that. I mean, pretty successfully, very successfully. So, but yeah, so I when in 2nd grade, I was reading Lester Del Rey wrote this series of, I guess when I was that age, I was reading what are now known as called young adult books.
Yep.
Right. Which are written.
YA.
Yeah. They're written more for teens really, but I was reading them when I was 7 or 8. And then by the time I got to be a teen, I kind of moved on to harder science fiction like, Larry Niven and Robert Heinlein and that stuff. So even though Heinlein also wrote some YA books that were pretty good. But reading was reading, and also writing. I even at that age I would write stories. There were almost all science fiction and fantasy stories. A lot of them were time travel stories about dinosaurs, because I was also a big dinosaur
fanatic.
fan.
Yeah.
So, but I wrote some space travel books and stuff like that.
That's cool. That's very interesting. I was curious, and also I was going to ask, you kind of led into that, is like what intrigued you to start writing, just from the stories that you were reading.
Yeah, just realizing that was a job.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, at first you just think these books magically appear, right? They're just there. You don't think about who wrote them or why they wrote them, or where those ideas come from. And they're just artifacts of your existence, right? But at a certain point, you realize, wait a minute, somebody is doing this and they're getting paid to do it, and they're doing it for a living, or they're doing it because they love it. And so, I think when you really like something, you want to imitate it to a certain extent.
Right.
And, that's what drives fan fiction. That's what drives now all kinds of things, because now you can work, kids that age can work in all kinds of media. They can make short films. They can make, they can do animation. They can do, none of that was really available to me. Basically drawing and writing. And I did a lot of both. I drew pictures of dinosaurs and spaceships and all that. And I wrote short, stories about them.
Yeah.
And also I have to say, me and my friends would play out imaginary scenarios. Like, again, most of us didn't have television. We lived in places where there wasn't a lot to do. So we would get together and we would decide we're going to play, like we're spacemen or whatever.
Yep.
We would come up with a scenario and we'll play through it.
I did a lot of that growing up too. It was a good
I
using your
actually,
I was gonna
at one
say
point, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say your imagination is it's very helpful when it comes.
Sure. Yeah. And it's a good coping mechanism. And it's just a fun thing to do. Occasionally got me in trouble. In third grade, we were living in Flagstaff, and I had just read, this isn't science fiction, but I had just read Call of the Wild by Jack London, which is about a domestic dog becoming a wolf, basically, right?
Yep.
And I organized on our playground. I organized some wolf packs. So the teacher came out, and we were all on all fours, like biting each other. And the teachers like, who's responsible for this? And they were all point to me. So I actually, in that case, did go to the principal's office.
Sounds like you were a little bit of a hellraiser, sir, back in beating people up in school and biting. And
I didn't beat people up. I just got in fights.
No,
I usually wasn't the one that started it, but
just joshing you.
Yeah, I know, I get
it. Yeah. See, when I grew up reading, it was like fantasy is what really got me. I love that. Just like you said, Tolkien, like he's inspired so many incredibly talented people because of his books. It's wild to think about it. Everyone I've talked to so far always mentions his name. 100%. His books are fantastic. I love the films too. I think the films, Peter Jackson did a great job with them. Right? Peter? No.
Yeah.
Peter Jackson. Yeah. But now when I saw Star Wars for the first time, like we mentioned, it's got that perfect mixture of fantasy and sci-fi. Like Lucas captured it to a T.
Right. It's got some spiritual, mystical elements. It's got, a little Eastern philosophy, but it's got technology that's not really explained, but you can see what it does. Right. Like, in fact, technology is not even, I guess science fiction, very often the story is driven by a technology, like the invention of a technology and the exploration of what would happen there. In Star Wars, the technology is just there, like it is in our world, right?
Yeah.
Like most fiction that's not science fiction or fantasy that involves, for instance, cars, you don't go into detail talking about how a car works and how it was invented. They're just there, and you know what they do, right? Even if the car is an important figure in the story, like it's a book about racing or something like that. And Star Wars is very much like that. The other thing I really honed in on immediately, which a lot of people did, was how the Star Wars universe looked lived in, right? Things were beaten up. Things were dirty. Things were not working that well. The Millennium Falcon has some issues, right? Everything's not shiny and perfect and futuristic in that sense.
Right.
It's a universe that real people live in, have lived in for a long time. Everything's not factory minted.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool too, actually.
Yeah. And honestly, I think the movies will stand the test of time, like certain reading material.
Yeah, I agree.
I was watching
my kid, I got an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, and the 18-year-old in particular is a huge Star Wars fan. I don't think he's ever read any of my books. It's not that. He just loves the movies.
Well, he needs to read the books. You got to get on him, sir. Yeah. I try to get my kids to read too, but they're, like you said, nowadays with technology and the things that they can do and create, and it's pretty incredible, really, when you think about it, how far we've come.
Right.
Through different generations and of time. Things have evolved so quickly. But how did you, well, like what interested you to do the anthropology? Like how did that Because that's not your
Probably the
common.
same things that attracted me to science fiction and fantasy, because like the first thing you see when you see anthropology is how it's studying difference, like cultures you don't understand, cultures you haven't had contact with, um, and pretty quickly when you're an anthropologist, you realize actually a lot of it's less about that and more about how we're all the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And there's also the fact that I was immersed for a couple of years in Navajo culture, which was quite different from where I grew up in Mississippi, and was quite fascinating to me. And really, that has influenced my fiction a lot, because the living on a landscape where and most of the people I knew were Navajo. I mean, there weren't that many kids there that weren't. And because this is pretty deep in the nation where we were in Many Farms, Arizona. And my dad was the business manager of the Navajo Community College. That's how we got there, basically. um, but living on a landscape where people can tell you where every rock came from mythologically, or there such and such a spirit lives in that place, and you have to approach it in this way. To see the world like that as alive, um, as a kid, I sort of took it for granted, but as I got older, I started having questions about it. And anthropology is sort of the discipline to answer those questions. But I really think that my love of anthropology, and I segued into that from a love of paleontology, right? I really, really, when I was in second or third grade, if you'd asked me what I wanted to be, I would say a paleontologist. And in fact, I believe in first grade, we were asked to do a picture of what we wanted to be when we grow up. And I was trying to mash things together. I said I wanted to be an exopaleontologist, which would be somebody that did paleontology on other planets.
Yeah.
So I'd go to Mars and do the paleontology of Mars, right? I wanted to do both things. I wanted to be able to fly in spaceships and study paleontology. And I settled in anthropology actually after I started college. I had a lot of interests. I wasn't actually very good at math. So some of the things I was interested in, like engineering, seemed out of reach to me.
Yeah, a lot of
But
mathematical
I took an
equations.
anthropology class. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say, yeah, engineering, you got to deal with a lot of different types of mathematical equations.
Exactly. And I will
Yeah.
say my brother that I mentioned earlier became an engineer. He became a chemical engineer, and a really highly successful one, because he had the math gene that I apparently lack. But we
Wow.
had similar interests. We grew up reading the same stuff and being interested in the same things. He just went that route. But it's also difficult to downplay the impact of Indiana Jones, which is a completely wrong-headed depiction of what archaeology and anthropology is. But again, it was super fun.
Yeah.
And by the time I first did archaeology. I studied archaeology. I did archaeology for a few years as a job, and by the time I got into it, I was like, yeah, okay, the Indiana Jones is kind of more of a looter than an archaeologist,
Yeah.
but those movies are still super fun, and I was fine with that. I was fine with what anthropology and archaeology actually were. I think a lot of people at that time got into those disciplines because of Indiana Jones and were turned off because it wasn't. They didn't get to run around with a bullwhip.
Yeah, I was going to say I wear the hat.
Uh, I guess I did wear a hat for a while. But
I was going to
doing
ask.
archaeology, and I was doing archaeology in Mississippi, and the sun was really bright, so I did wear a hat. But I did not have a bullwhip.
Wow. We'll have to get you one. You can wear it around now. My family and I, we actually, about 4 or 5 years ago, we took a trip to Biloxi, Mississippi. We stayed down there
Mhm.
for a week. Beautiful, beautiful area. We actually really loved it down there. A lot of, we just something different. Normally we take the kids to a water park. I got 4 kids, but
Okay.
so every year we'll take them somewhere, but it's like, nah, let's go visit something that we've never seen. Let's go somewhere we've never been, because I'm from Wisconsin, so it
Right.
was quite a trip. And oh man, actually, it was just at the start of COVID
Mm,
when we left, when we were coming home, and immediately things got weird everywhere. So we drove straight back from Mississippi to
yeah.
Wisconsin. It was like, oh, it was the worst drive of my life. But I've been there.
Yeah, that was and I have to say the coast is a different Mississippi than what I grew up in. But that was the coast, that was our coast. I grew up in Meridian, which is about 3 hours from the coast. And growing up, we went to I guess mostly we went to the Alabama and the Florida coast, which are all right there. They're all
Yeah.
crammed together. But that was my idea of what the Gulf of Mexico was my idea of what the ocean was. So now I live on the Atlantic. I'm in Savannah,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
which is nice. I like it here. I've been here over 20 years, and my kids have grown up with an ocean 12 minutes away, which is hard for me to imagine, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but it's kind of cool.
Well,
But
that's
yeah.
good for them. Yeah. Yeah. My, I know you said you're 15 and 18. I got my one boy's 14 and my other one's 15 and just got his temps. So
Just
that's
guys,
been
what?
his temporary license,
Oh yeah.
learning to drive. So that's been pretty interesting. He's pretty excited for that.
Mine aren't super interested in learning. Well, my oldest is 18, and he's got his learner's permit, what you
Uh-huh.
call the temps, and but he still doesn't have his license, and he's clearly not in a hurry.
Huh?
I was,
Me
because I
too.
lived in a kind of I mean, where I grew up, you had to have a car to go anywhere and do anything other than hang out in the woods. So, but he's got friends that drive. Uber exists now.
Yeah.
Um, you can get a lot of places on foot in Savannah. Um, so he's clearly not in a big hurry to
Yeah.
to drive. So I
I'm,
think my younger one, the 15-year-old, is going to be. She just got something from her school saying she could get her um, learner's permit. She's really excited about it. So
well, good. Well, I hope everything goes well. Yeah. I got a couple friends that they don't have a car. They walk or ride a bike, or they live in a vicinity, or they try to live somewhere where everything's in walking distance, like you mentioned.
yeah, if
Eh,
you live in Manhattan or someplace like that, and there
yeah.
are neighborhoods. Savannah, you really need a car. I mean, unless you live downtown, like in the historic district, which I almost do, but not quite. Um, you really need a car.
Yeah.
Most of America is built around the necessity for a car, and you can argue whether that's good or bad, but it's just the case,
That's the
right?
way it is. Right. Yeah, I agree. Well, archaeology. Have you ever heard of Graham Hancock?
Yeah, he's the ancient astronauts guy, or one of them.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if with anthropology and archaeology, this whole mixture. I've recently came across a show of his, so I just figured I'd ask you. It was interesting. I like learning about that stuff and listening to other people, you know, uncover or whatever you want to think about it. But also, I want to say thank you for taking the time. I meant to tell you that earlier, but it's just
Oh,
like
no
our
worries.
conversation was just rolling. So thank you for taking your time to chat with me. It means a lot to me, by the way. And I
Sure.
appreciate all the magic that you've created for us. So,
Thanks.
yeah. So going into we'll jump around a little bit. We'll have fun. It's always interesting talking about different things. But Rebirth.
Hmm.
So these are basically a duo set of books. What was that like the plan? Was this going to be a one book situation, or did they want two?
It was the plan. They wanted to, and
Okay.
in fact, they're both packaged together as Edge of Victory, if I remember
Yep.
correctly. Right.
Yep.
So it was, I think, meant to be sort of a hinge point um, in that story arc where
Right
we
there.
start to see them winning a little bit. Right. Yeah. There we go. We start up until now. Up until that point, there's been a lot of losing going on. Chewie gets killed, and you know, Edge of Victory. was supposed to be the point where we start seeing them win a little bit, like, and another reason it was fun to write that. And of course, in Rebirth, there's also a literal birth, which is Luke and Mara Jade's kid.
Ben, yeah.
Which was really interesting for a couple reasons. Like, so I knew that was going to happen, and I asked them, well, what's the kid's name going to be? And they're like, well, okay, you can pick. And then I said, well, okay. And they said, oh, but maybe from this list. So they gave me a list of possible names, because I had actually thought about having Luke name him after Luke's uncle, after Owen Lars, right? Because maybe he's hoping for a peaceful future where his son doesn't have to engage in all the stuff that he has. But Ben was obviously a more obvious choice, and it was the same choice that they made for Han and Leia's kid, and the sequels.
Anakin, yeah.
Well, yeah. But also Ben. Ben.
the new canon. You're right.
Yeah. But one of the funny fallouts from that, from my point of view, was at that point in time, I used to go to Dragon Con every year. And I actually started going to Dragon Con again in the past few years because my brother goes, my kids love to cosplay. If you've never been to Dragon Con, it's like the biggest cosplay event you'll ever see. It's just fantastic. And but back then I would go as an author, and I still go as an author, but back then I was going almost as like part of my work, right? Mm-hmm. And I was walking around the dealer's room, and this group of young women found me, and they were the Schwicks, the Star Wars chicks, and they had just read Rebirth, and they had a baby shower for Ben, and they had all these presents to give me from the baby shower.
Really?
Yeah. And I was kind of walking around with a couple of friends of mine who were just there out of curiosity. They weren't really huge fans of the whole thing. I mean, they were of course aware of Star Wars, but they weren't like, they just like, at the time, well, I guess I was here in Savannah, so it's about a 3-hour drive. So we all drove up there together. But they were really confused as to what was going on. They're like, what's happening here? Like, what's happening? Yeah. I knew what was happening, but I still was not something I was expecting. And it was fun. It was cool. I can't even tell you now, because that was a long time ago, what exactly they gave me. But I remember I had an armload of stuff.
That's cool. That's a wild story, but that's cool. And, that's what I mean. These books, they really affect people, right? Like they're here for it. That's why I love reading so much too. It's helped me a lot over the past few years, and it's an escape. And it's just, seriously, I'm so thankful for one, that you're talking to me, because it's mind blowing, and two, how much you've done, not just in Star Wars, but in your other material too. Like I know your fantasy series is very well liked, and so I appreciate it so much, sir. It's incredible. And
thanks. I very much look at it as my job, but I look at it as a job that I want to do. I've often said that if I ever get to the point that I don't want to do this, or if I'm asked to write a book I really don't want to write, but I feel for some reason feel like I have to do it for the money, I'd honestly rather just go get a job as a clerk at a convenience store. So it's always been about me being able to pick projects that I could somehow get into, right? Yeah. Actually, last night, I actually ended up having a really late night, because right now I'm working on the novelization of the new Godzilla Kong movie. And there was some late breaking stuff that I had to deal with, and they're on the West Coast, so I had to deal with it at like 2 a.m.
Oh my goodness.
So I had to wake up last night and deal with the stuff and get it out of the way. Um, so I did sleep later this morning than I usually sleep. I think I got up at about 7. So there's still plenty of time for this,
Oh,
uh,
oh wow.
but yeah, I'm knee deep in a couple of different things right now. So
Really? Godzilla and Kong, hey, the new, yeah, yeah. You've worked on one of them novelizations in the past too.
I've
Yeah,
done actually three. This will be my third novelization of a legendary,
yeah.
the studio, right? Legendary Studios, Monsterverse, and I did also a graphic novel for them, which was my one and only graphic novel, and that was really really cool. Because I also grew up reading comics,
Yeah.
right? I mean, at a certain point, I went and I got to college. I realized, okay, I can pay $1.25 for a comic because they had gone up to that, or I could go to a used bookstore and get a novel for $1.25, and it started. So my comic book reading started tailing off at that point.
It,
But comics were also hugely important to me growing up. It was something we could get when we on the in Arizona. We only went to the grocery store about once a month because it was so far away. But my parents would buy us a bunch of comics to read, like on the trip back. Um, so getting to do a graphic novel, and of course I didn't do the artwork. That was done by Drew Johnson, who's a fantastic artist. But it was really interesting to learn the process, like how do you write a script for a graphic novel.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know the graphic novel side of things, but well, shoot, I'm sorry. I know you're an early bird like myself. I I love the early mornings. Do you work? Do you normally work in the morning? Like, is that when you prefer to like?
I do. I mean, right now and for the past several years, a lot of my morning is getting my kids ready to school and getting them there, right?
Yeah,
But habitually, if you want to go back to when I started writing and look at the arc of when I write, yeah, I do my best work in the morning with a cup of coffee. Um, so
coffee is key.
coffee is key. And when I wrote my first few books, I was pretty busy. I had two full time. Well, I had a full time job. I had a part time job at night where I did a lot of my writing. I was a security guard at a retirement condominium, and during the day, I ironed newspapers flat so they could be microfilmed. So that's a relatively mindless job. So I was able to think a lot about what I would write in that job, and then at night in my night job, I took a typewriter and wrote a little electric typewriter. Um, and then later on, I was in grad school. So because when I first started writing seriously, I just got married. I got married in 1987, and I was 24, and I would basically use all my spare time to write. Specifically, I would write in the summertime, especially after I started grad school, because I had 3 months when I wasn't in grad school.
Yeah,
And my wife was always very, she didn't think I was nuts. She didn't think I would fail. She always supported what I did. Um, Even though I could have been using that time, I guess, for another job, because we had very little, we did not have money. Um, but, uh, but she never even suggested that. She just supported what I did.
well,
Still does, actually.
that's a good woman, sir. That's good. Yeah, you got to have that support. But I totally hear what you're saying. My wife supports me in doing this, but sometimes you could take time to do other things. But it's a balance, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah, sure.
it's your passion, and it turned into something.
Excuse me.
No, you're good. You're good. Maybe you need some more coffee.
Yeah, eventually. We had like 6 cups this morning, so
Yeah, I drink a lot
my
too.
wife and I always get up and have coffee before the kids are up.
Yep,
Just sort of talk through the day, figure out what we're going to do.
yep. Same here. My wife and I do the same thing.
Yeah,
That's why it's just peaceful. It's a good calm. Not a lot of actions going on. The kids
that's
are
right.
still sleeping. Get your bearings together. I do a little reading too. I read a lot in the morning before I start my day. I get up about 3 hours before I actually have to go to work.
Yeah.
To
What do
I
you
work
do?
I work at a race shop. I actually weld and build,
Okay, that's cool.
fabricate. Yeah, for
Yeah, yeah. My
yeah, we
wife's
sell.
teaches metalworking,
Really?
so she does it on different scale with different materials than you do. But there are a lot of torches, and
Yeah. Cutters,
she
plasma
does.
cutters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She teaches uh, jewelry, metalworking, and jewelry design at Savannah College of Art and Design.
Oh, cool.
So
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually I was going to school to be an electrician. I'm actually a third year apprentice, and I was working in the shipyard. Um, and then out of high school, I actually worked for the same company that I'm working for now, but I took a management job, a foreman position, and then it just got to be too stressful for me.
I can see
Like,
that. Yeah.
yeah, it was a lot, and especially when you're dealing with the government, because it was a government contract.
Hmm.
High pressure. Let's just say that, very high pressure. Actually, I got when my grandfather passed away 4 years ago. I took the day off because obviously that's my grandfather, right? And they actually called me because I was supposed to be in a meeting, and that was kind of like the icing on the cake for me to say I'm done here, and I never went back. But so I've always been around racing my whole life. My dad's been a big racing guy, uh,
Okay.
late models, circle track, NASCAR, the whole deal. So yeah, I weld. I make drive shafts and
I've got a
very
friend right now who's studying welding because she and her husband want to sort of sail. They have a sailboat and they kind of want to sail around the world. And apparently, welding is something that's welcome at pretty much any port you go into. You can pick up work as a
uh,
welder. Um, my wife's actually really fond of, it's not clear exactly what our kids are going to do. Um, they haven't settled on anything, but my wife talks a lot about how there are vanishingly few machinists anymore, right? People who can actually just fabricate
right.
stuff out of metal. And, if you can do that, if you can weld, um, there's, I don't know if it's your experience, but it seems to be something
The
that
I,
is in short supply.
I was gonna say the trade industry for all trades, metalworking, electrical, plumbing, you know, machinist.
Right.
It's very, yeah, it's tough. It's very tough. There's not a, I don't know what people just aren't interested anymore, but I feel, on a different note that it's going to be an issue in the future.
Well, I think it's already an issue. I mean, like my wife talks about trying to get machined parts and how difficult it is because nobody knows how to do that. And I think it's usually an apprenticeship situation, right? You have, go to school to learn it necessarily. You learn it from somebody. And that's, again, something that's not happening that much anymore.
No,
So,
it's not. And I was on a team when I was in the managing position. We would do hiring events and such. And we even tried to work with the local high schools to maybe, hey, let's get a program together for the kids to say, hey, this is what it's like to, because I live near a shipyard. This is what it's
right.
like to, do all these jobs, the different type of, and that just kind of fell to the wayside. And yeah, it's
See, my school actually had a VOTEC program. They had a shop. And so
yeah,
you can learn all that stuff. And if you were good at it and you felt that's what you wanted to do, your junior and senior year, there was a regional place that you could go to learn that stuff. But again, that was in the '70s, early '80s. Um, uh, I think high school now tends to be much more college preparatory, whereas when I was in high school, only a fraction of us were preparing to go to college. Right? Everybody else was looking for a trade or
just
just
going to
had the
work.
just had the minimum education you need to help run your society, right?
Right.
You know, to help run your culture when you grow up. Um, but I think somewhere along the line, it's become so exclusively about college prep. But I think that's going to swing the other way. So we'll see.
Yeah. Hopefully, it's going to have to. Otherwise, we'll be in some dire need of a lot of people. Even the automotive industry is tough and hurting
Right.
real bad. I know for some of the race cars that we sponsor and maintain, at one point it was to get race car tires was just like $300 a
Really?
tire. It was bad.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Materials,
You're
even
not talking about
material.
stock cars, right? You're talking about like,
No,
um,
stock cars.
oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Yep. Late
Wow.
model, short track. I've we deal with NASCAR, worldwide. Actually, what we do, so it's pretty
Cool.
cool.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah, it's actually a really great job. It's a family owns it. They've owned it. I mean, so on a personal level, like we know everyone knows everyone, so it's really cool. It's actually a
Sure.
really and it's a good thing too. The boss that owns it is a very caring and it's just it's a good place to work. But not only that, we get to handle like people in NASCAR, and
Right.
it's kind of a bonus if you're into that kind of thing, racing. But so back to I forgot to
Okay.
mention. Yeah, sorry. This is a good
No, that's all
conversation. I'm having fun. Do you have time? I don't want to keep you. I
Yeah,
know
I
you
have
said you
time.
were
I've set aside this part of the day, so
excellent.
we're
Well, I
good.
appreciate that. I meant to bring up the Lambent crystal from Anakin's lightsaber and how he could actually sense the Vong when he found that
Right, because he's incorporating their technology
in
into his stuff. Yeah. Um, I guess what's your question?
just like did you that was something you came up with and that you wanted
Right,
to
it was, even though it was part of the. So I guess we're far enough out from this that I'm free to say that even though when the series started, one of the things that was always in place was where the Thavong couldn't be sensed in the Force,
right
that they weren't involved in the Force, but nobody knew why. Like there wasn't an explanation for it.
right
Initially,
right
it was just a precondition. But my books, again, we were supposed to start seeing um, a bit of a turnaround, right? An early sign that the Jedi might be able to do something about this, and so that was part of it. But if I, it is something I pitched. I mean, it was my idea
yeah
that maybe if he incorporated Vong technology, then in some way, since it's all living and to a certain extent connected, if he bridges that gap, then maybe it's not as good as the Force. It's not as but it's better than nothing, which is what they have against the Vong.
yeah
And was this also an early exploration of what might be going on there? I will also say that at a certain point I was involved in trying to figure out why they weren't in the Force. Like I was on a conference call with a bunch of people. This is much later in the process, before I wrote my last book in the series. Um, and this was after the prequels, obviously. So I said something about midichlorians, and it's like maybe they just don't have midichlorians, and they're like, "Oh no, we can't mention, we will not speak of
really
midichlorians."
so was
Because
there
at that,
some
go ahead.
is that because of something George didn't want was George
I
involved in this process, right?
Not very. That's why I mean, like there was Sue Rostani, whose job was to be the liaison. She worked at the ranch, right? She was part of that whole thing, but her job was licensing literature, the books, and other media representations that weren't movies. And so Lucas, as far as I know, was fairly separated from this. I mean, he obviously got final word. I'll give you an example
Okay.
of something I know that happened, and that was uh, in when Chewie got killed, it wasn't at all clear it was Chewie that was going to get killed. They were supposed to kill somebody, like one of the original 7, right?
Yeah.
And eventually, the choices came down to Chewie and R2 for the same reasons, because it's hard to write them. Like in the movies, they make noises and people interpret.
Yep.
But it's difficult to do that in the books, right? And then the third possibility was Londo, because he is a lot like Han and was seen as being like, do we really need 2 of these guys, right?
Yeah.
And it ended up being Chewie, which was bad. You know, Bob Salvatore got death threats from
That's what I heard.
Some of the crazier fans. And it was not his choice. But, you know, briefly, I guess they considered even killing Luke. And at the time, Lucas was like, no, you're not going to do that. And that's the first time I'd actually made the connection that Lucas and Luke are the same name. But they are.
Yeah.
So at that point, he wasn't. But generally speaking, if he was involved in the decision, I think it was at that level, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't at the level of down here, which is. But that's not to say that these books weren't thoroughly vetted by Lucasfilms, because they were, just not by him. So aside from Sue, they actually had, I'm going to call them a room full of Star Wars fans. They weren't literally all in the same room, but it was about 24 people who were really, really, really fans of the movies, of the expanded universe. They'd read everything. They were really into it. There were all kinds of people involved. I mean, I remember meeting one of them was assistant DA in Los Angeles County, but then others were like high school students. You know, I mean, it was just a wide range of people that had somehow gotten onto Lucasfilm's radar as these super fans who really knew what they were talking about. And they read draft versions of all of those books. And if they said, this book is not a Star Wars book, I mean, sometimes it was just like, okay, well, we feel like Mara Jade is being portrayed wrong here, so maybe the author could fix that. But in a couple of cases, they said, I don't know what's going on with this book, but it's not a Star Wars book. And those books did not get published. There were a couple that did not get published.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about them.
Because these guys read them and said, no, this is not.
Doesn't feel like it?
It doesn't feel like it. Han's not Han. Luke's not Luke. You know, and more importantly, maybe Mara Jade is not. You know, again, the ones that are not the film characters. People had very strong feelings about some of those characters, right?
Oh yeah.
They had grown up with them. They had come to love them in their own right. There was a sense of proprietorship there, because the general Star Wars audience wasn't even aware they existed. Like, who knew? The people that so casually watch the movies, they don't know who Talon Card is, or Corran Horn, or even Mara Jade, right?
Yeah.
They have no idea who those people are. But the fans of the expanded universe really knew who they were, right? And had very strong ideas about who they were based on who had created them and how they were written by those authors. And so picking up another author's character and treating them appropriately is actually more difficult than treating like Han Solo appropriately, because all you have to do is just watch the movies over and over again and pick up on his speech patterns and his you know, all that. But nevertheless, some people tended to get even those characters wrong. And even if I were going to tell you who the authors were, and I wouldn't if I could remember their names, but I don't even remember now who it was. But there was a book right before one of mine that got canceled, and I had to sort of pick up right before my last one, the
Final Prophecy.
Final Prophecy. So I had to pick up some of the slack that book was supposed to cover. So they were like, in fact, I was not originally intended to write another Star Wars book in the New Jedi Order, and I think that the failure of that earlier manuscript precipitated it. Like that, and the fact that they wanted me in on the big discussions about what's actually going on here, like Zenoma Sakat and all that stuff. Like, we need to put this all together because we're bringing this to an end,
to a close. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we need to tie up the loose ends. We need to get the authors that they picked some of us to be involved, and to try to figure out how to close it all out. And obviously a lot of the threads continued into other series, but the New Jedi Order had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
So
the biggest series of books that they've done so far.
Yeah.
Well, now it's Legends and they don't continue. But I was going to ask you, because I'm not sure, but like the books, Knightfall, right? Them were a trilogy that was supposed to happen, but didn't happen, like before your books, or did you take over from them?
I don't remember specifically if that was the case. Like I said, I did take over from whatever book was supposed to, and I think it was that. I didn't take it over. I didn't do their plot line, but I had to pick up some of the
Right.
the canon slack. I had to cover some of the things that were necessary to be covered to get to the last book. Right, mine was the second to the last book.
Right,
mine was the last paperback, and then there was one more hardback. I think it was Knightfall, but I'm not going to swear to that. For me, it's been a long time, and I've been doing a lot of other things since then. So I think about this kind of thing when people ask me questions about it. But I remember a lot about my own process, but what happened with the other books? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, these might even been the books, from the little bit of knowledge that I've gotten through people, where these might have been those books that you said there was a group of individuals that were picked to read, and they're like, nah, these don't feel like it. I had no idea there was some issues towards the end of the process.
And to their credit, I mean, because of the way publishing works, they would have paid those authors something. Maybe not the full amount, but there's something called a kill fee, right? So if you enter in good faith into writing a book for a franchise, and for whatever reason they choose not to accept it, they still pay you not
something.
They still pay you something, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually happened to me, but it was on projects that did not come apart because of me. They came apart because of some disagreement. But I've been on at least 2 projects where I actually wrote the book, and then there was some disagreement between the license, between the studio and the publisher, because they're different entities, right?
Right.
And things were just canceled, but they still paid me for the work I had done, right? The books weren't published, which was a bummer, but
yeah,
they still paid me. So I guess what I'm saying is that Del Rey and Lucasfilms were picky enough about the New Jedi Order that they weren't going to publish something that was just clearly outside of what it needed to be, even though they still had to pay for it to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
But there was an accountability there that came, I believe, mostly from Lucasfilms. They're like, we just don't, we don't want any really bad Star Wars books, right? So that's, in a way, that's admirable, because in especially back then, in the world of licensed fiction, there are definitely people that just didn't care. Like there are licensed books that got published that were just awful in every way. There's no accountability. The authors didn't put a lot of effort into it. And to be fair, they often happen to be written really quickly. I mean, my Star Wars books were written in about 3 months, maybe 4 months tops. That's compared to, at the time, I was spending at least a year writing my own stuff. But since then, I've been involved in licensed projects, where I had to turn in a manuscript in more like a month. I mean, these things sometimes So that's a skill in and of itself. Like there's some people out there that are excellent writers, but they can't write a book in 3 weeks.
No,
You know,
I
and
don't even know how you do that.
you just write all day, every day, and hope it's not garbage,
Ah,
because you don't have that chance to like let it cool and get some perspective on it, right? You just have to write it and
right.
send it off, hope that your editor is good, and will, deal with it. That's what I meant earlier by I want to do the best job I can given the time and the material, right?
Right.
Um, so often there's not enough time, and often it's hard to get what you need from the studio, like because they one of the books I was working on that was canceled because the studio was just paranoid that something would be released onto the internet before the movie and spoil everything. And
Mm.
so they just eventually shut the whole thing down. I mean, I was put in a, if you think about it, if somebody's going to do a novelization of a book, the first thing you would do would be to give them a script, right? But I've
Yeah.
worked on projects where that wasn't really the case. Not only in one case, um, uh, I was given, I I was not given a script. I had to go to the studio and sit with a script and a pad of paper and a pencil. No phone, no computer, nothing like that, and take notes on the script. What I did was just copied the whole thing verbatim.
Mm.
But I had a project like that that didn't work out at all, and they just canceled it. And then I did a novelization of the movie Interstellar, which also worked like that. I sat in Christopher Nolan's office for 4 days. He wasn't there. I didn't meet him. But I sat in his office for 4 days with the script, copying it because they wouldn't give me a copy of it.
That's crazy.
Isn't it crazy? But it's got to do with this worry that something's going to be released on the internet. Um,
Yeah.
and
I suppose, I mean, I get it in the world we live in now, but still, I mean, you were like basically you're contracted, right, to do the
right.
job.
Oh, and
You-
you have to sign like NDAs all over the place, right? This is actually one reason I've done so many books now for Legendary, like the Godzilla books, is because they give me everything I need. They give me everything I need up front. They trust me. I work for them or worked with them a bunch. They know I'm not going to
right.
blab. Um, so, you know, it, I've had time to form a relationship with them, and they're not as paranoid as some studios. So, um, but with Star Wars, most of that wasn't an issue back in the day. Like, of course, we were not supposed to leak anything onto um, with our AOL accounts,
Right.
but um,
Good old
as far as
AOL.
I know, nobody did. I mean, if you want
Yeah.
to keep working, if you want to keep doing licensed fiction, you can't like
Well, yeah,
do
you
that.
want to make a
Yeah,
name, like you made a name for yourself, right? They
you have to
appreciate you, they
trust. You have
respect
to
you, trust you. Right. I've heard that Star Wars was kind of, well, I was going to ask that as well, but you kind of answered that. Like, how were they? Were they like lock and key with you, with anything they gave you, like the outline, or you were on full?
Yeah, I mean, there was a process. You knew that how the process worked. Again, we had Cyril Stoney, whose really only job was to communicate with us and with our editors at the publisher. The only up until like maybe the Legendary thing, when I was working with Babylon 5, I actually had the phone number of Straczynski's. He's the guy that wrote,
Mm,
produced,
yeah, yeah.
created that show. Uh, this woman named Fiona Avery, who was his assistant, like his first assistant. I had her phone number, and if I had a question, any question, I just called her.
Mm,
And so that was an extremely fluid working relationship. Star Wars was almost that fluid. It was just there were more people involved. So the more people that are involved, the more there's sort of a committee of people involved, the longer things can take. Um, and when you're just talking to one or two people, but when you're talking to like 5 or 6 people, and everybody's got to weigh in, and you've got that room of Star Wars fans that also have their opinion. It's just a somewhat different process, but I didn't find it at all onerous. I mean, I wanted to get it right. I knew that those guys knew more about the Star Wars universe than I was willing to,
Dive
was ever
into. Yeah.
right. They were also a sample of the audience that I was writing for, which is important. You have to know who your readers are and what they want,
Yeah.
like. You definitely got to be in touch with that, especially when you're doing a popular licensed thing like Star Wars. I mean,
yeah. Well, you mentioned some of the authors that you worked with, like you talked to Mr. Stackpole. Like you brought Corin Horn back into the mix in this
right.
novel, which was awesome. So working with them guys, I'm sure it was pretty helpful. Like I've
That
heard
was
that
sort of mostly that was casual though, because Mike didn't do any of the books in the New Jedi Order. In fact, one of the kind of glaring omissions is none of the like Zahn, Stackpole. I don't remember if Kevin did anything, but for the most part, the old authors were not included, and they weren't. Some of them were a little miffed about it, but Mike was very generous in that he didn't really understand why one of the more popular authors in the Star Wars universe wasn't asked to do anything. He was really willing to give of his time and his opinion to people like me who asked for it, right?
Well, yeah.
But that was pretty informal. Like that's sort of kind of off the books, because I knew he would know. He's very in touch with the fans at the time. I just knew he would know what was important if I didn't.
Yeah, and Mr. Lucino too. He was, I believe.
Yeah,
he was involved, and yeah, it's so interesting.
Matthew Stover, I got to know pretty well. Mostly through conventions and stuff. I remember a long horseback ride I had with him and some other people in Monterey. Because back then we'd go to these conventions and we'd all kind of get together and hang out for a few days.
Yeah.
And,
I bet you got some stories to tell about that.
Probably.
Going out with the boys.
Yeah.
Horseback riding, eh?
Yeah, something I think my editor set up, like if I remember correctly. She was a horse. She was a equestrian in the English style, and I remember I did grow up riding, but I grew up riding Western, right? And these horses were trained English. It's not a huge translation. It didn't take me long.
Yeah.
I was always pretty decent at riding, but anyway, it was fun.
Yeah. Watching Gunsmoke and The Rifleman with James Arness.
Well, I did see those shows, but only because that, like I said, I didn't have a lot of television, but I did live in Arizona, right? Where there was a great deal of that.
That's a big deal there.
Yeah. And I knew, people in Mississippi had horses as well, so.
You do any You do any hunting or anything along that line? Fishing?
I grew up hunting with my grandfather, mostly squirrel and whitetail deer, but hunting and fishing. And, it was a substantial amount of the meat that we ate when I was a kid was game. Like a lot of venison, we ate squirrel. People have difficulty understanding that, but squirrel's actually pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
And we did a lot of fishing, but a lot of that for me, especially as I moved into my teen years, was very much about being with my grandfather. Like hunting was something I could do it, but as a thing I could sort of take it or leave it. But I loved being with my grandfather. It's just something we could do together. So,
yeah, I hear you there, sir. My grandfather was a big hunter. He was an outdoorsman. He could jack of all trades. He was a trapper. I remember him raccoon and mink and otter and white-tailed deer. That's big up here. Fishing. I grew up around that. I
Yeah,
never
yeah.
really got into it though. I never
Yeah, I
followed
didn't really
suit.
continue it after I moved away. Um, my my grandfather actually only, well, I guess he died in, I think, 2009. So, he was with us for a long time. And maybe 10 or 15 years before he died, he decided he probably wasn't going to hunt anymore. And so he sort of gave away he gave, the rifle I killed my first deer with was a lever action Winchester 30-30.
Oh wow.
Um, and I didn't know that it was his, and he gave me that. So that's like actually the one gun I actually have in the house is that 30-30.
That's yeah.
But I haven't used it, for anything but target practice in decades. I just hunting, and hunting is not fishing. You can do in Savannah pretty easily. Hunting, you have to like drive a
It
significant
got some
distance.
distance. Yeah.
Yeah,
I can imagine, yeah. My
yeah.
grandparents lived they had 240s. They would feed the deer. The deer would come right up to the window. I mean,
Hmm.
it was a lot of wildlife. It was nice to live out in the
Yeah,
county.
I grew up literally in the woods in Mississippi, and there was a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sir, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I mean, it's crazy that does that happen a lot that they get a hold of you if something changes like that? That's and then you got to jump on to change whatever you're writing in the script or
In Star Wars, it really only happened the one time. Like I thought it was sort of out of it. I did my two books, and had moved on. I was writing the Briar King books, the Kingdoms of Thorn and Bone,
yep.
and they came back to me and said, like, look, we need to figure out a few things here, and we want you to do one more book. And I was happy to do it. Um, but in terms of like, uh, you mean like in terms of like things getting canceled, or in terms of?
Well, what you were just working on, what you told before, how you had to get up this morning at 2 a.m. because they got a hold of
Oh,
you.
that, yeah. Well, yeah. So my publisher for those books is in London.
Oh,
The
okay.
studio I'm working with is in LA, and I'm on the East
So
Coast.
yeah, the time difference is
Yeah, so I have to respond to things very early in the morning and very late in the evening, sometimes in the middle of the night.
yeah.
And it's usually not that quick, but sometimes in this case, they wanted to show me what's called an asset, right? So they wanted to show me something that I need to know in order to get we're in the final stages of that book now that we're doing sort of fine tweaking, because the movie's basically in the can now. They've already released a trailer last week. Um, so I'm now bringing the book into line with the final version of the movie,
Okay.
so that there won't be any contradiction. So they wanted to show me an asset. And in general, the way they do that, even though they, trust me, basically, is that you get a timed link to something and you get it for 2 or 3 hours and then it's gone. So
Oh,
you pretty much have to see it when it's there.
and do it.
And you can't, I mean, I there are ways, I suppose, to copy it, but I'm explicitly not supposed to do that. So
Right.
it's about being there when it's about being there when it drops.
Yeah, yeah. It,
And the right now the guys in LA that are bringing this movie home, they're not sleeping either. They're all very, very busy right now, and whether or not it occurs to them that I'm 3 hours later than them almost doesn't matter, right?
yeah,
It's just something that has to get done. So
right. It's
yeah,
go time.
especially since I've been working with this publisher and that studio. Yeah, sometimes things have to be done right now, very quickly, no delays.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Hmm. Well, I didn't know that. I'm sure when it gets towards the latter part of the project, it's go time, and it's no rest for the wicked.
The
Per
deadlines
se.
get very short. Like,
Yeah.
I turn in a manuscript to my editor in London. He reads it in a matter of days, says, here are all the things I think you need to fix. And then I maybe have a week at that point to do that.
Mm.
That would be compared to the editor. So I've got another book coming out in April, which is called The Wind That Sweeps the Stars. And it's an original novel. It's not a licensed work. And the timeline on that is much more fluid, because if something happens and it can't come out in April, no big deal. It comes out in May or June or July. These movie books, they have to come out when the movie comes out, right? There's a hard deadline. And somehow everything has to happen. And there's a lot that doesn't even involve me that has to happen for that book to get made and get on the shelves by that time.
Yeah, to fall into
So,
place.
yeah. So, and for whatever reason, since a lot of these movies come out in the spring and early summer, a lot of these run into this holiday period, right? Where people are off for Thanksgiving or they got Christmas stuff.
Christmas.
And it's not ideal, right? So, yeah, I've worked on Christmas Day before. And certainly within a couple of days of Christmas before. It's just part of the deal,
Yeah. Well, you got to get the job done.
Yeah.
Right. Let me ask you this question here, because I've asked a few others. Mr. Joe Bongiorno kind of talked about what I asked him, Mr. Stewart, and I ask you now, when you write characters or when you write, do you feel like a character talks to you to get it out on paper? Or how does that whole process happen for you?
Yeah, I do. I think the way I explain it so that it don't sound like a schizophrenic is that, like, you build these models of these characters almost like simulations of them, and you run them in your head. And so it's a little less like having them talk to me, and a little more like temporarily being them, or as close as I can get to that. And that's independent of what I'm actually writing. So, for instance, I wrote a series of books called The Age of Unreason, and one of the characters is a 15-year-old when the book starts, Benjamin Franklin. So I not only read whatever I could find about him, I read everything that I could find that he had written, including a journal he wrote when he was about 20, when he went to England and came back. And it's his and he's kind of, at that point, he's kind of a jerk. Like, he thinks he knows better than the captain of the ship. Like, he's like, the captain of the ship doesn't think that we're anywhere near land, but I feel certain we're going to make landfall tomorrow. And of course they don't. It's another 2 months before they make landfall. He's completely wrong, because he doesn't know what he's talking about. And the captain does, but he's a bit full of himself. He's not by far quite as knowledgeable, as smart as he thinks he is. This is as a young man, right?
Yeah.
But you could still, but anyway, so to try to climb into his mindset when he was young, it's really different than the way he portrays himself in the autobiography, where he's cultivating a specific image, right? So, or if it's a fictional character that I've just created out of the air, I mean, I guess in the end, any character that I write is some part of myself that I've repurposed, right? And sometimes that can be a bit scary, especially if you're repurposing, a villain of a particular sort. I wrote a book that's got this sort of almost like a supernatural, pedophile in it, and you don't really want to be in that place.
No,
you don't want to put your mind in that place. And there's only so far I was able to go into that, right?
Right.
But to write him convincingly, I had to find something, right? So it's I guess it's a little like method acting, maybe I would compare it to that, even though I'm not an actor. But if the characters are made of some part of you, that's inescapable because that's what you have. But but hopefully, especially with bad characters like that, they're not you. But I've written some characters that really exhausted me and that I had to take a break from. I just didn't want to be in their heads anymore.
Wow.
Like I just really didn't want to be in their heads anymore. And so I would have to like take a break and write something else. That's why I occasionally, but don't always write from I actually want to write from the point of view of characters that I would like if I knew them, or at least I would like something about them. Right.
Makes sense.
I'm not
Yeah.
really into writing really bad characters. And there's some kinds of characters I just don't want to make sympathetic. It's one thing to write a nuanced bad guy who's got motives that are comprehensible and make you go, well, okay, I can see why he's doing that. I wouldn't do that, but I can see where he's coming from. And then there's the ones that you just don't want to understand them.
Yeah. You don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's too hard.
Yeah.
And all authors obviously don't work that way. I can remember, and it kind of goes in the writing process. It goes to whether you outline or not, or how extensively you outline. For media books, I outline a lot because it's required. For my own stuff, I actually have more tendency to sort of write and see where it goes. And to your question about characters, my first novel, The Waterborne, there's a character named Prakar. And I had written a brief outline to work from. And there was this laundry list of things he does between the beginning of the book and the end of the book. And I got to a certain point in the book where I had been writing him long enough and I knew him well enough that he faces this point where he's either got to run away or die. Okay. Those are his two choices.
Okay.
He's got to run away from the danger or he's going to die. The problem is his friends run to the danger and they're going to die. And I knew him well enough by that point to know that he will never let them do that alone. So he's now also going to die in the middle of my book. And so obviously the book is not going to go where I plotted it because this character has done something I was not planning on him doing, which again, like I've had other authors that work differently tell me that just sounds like you're crazy, like you're schizophrenic. But it's just that I think it's really more of just an understanding of how you've been writing the character. Like, he's like this, and I know him now, and I know he would never let his friends do that alone, ever. Yeah. So I had to change the book from the midpoint on. It was a completely different book, and arguably a way better book than what I had planned. And it was definitely more fun to write because I no longer knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
It was more like being a reader, watching things unfold. And so that's one of the joys of writing as well. And that also happens with licensed work. It's just if that happens, then you have to go back and say, okay, this is what happened here. Are you guys still okay with this? And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. If it's good, then they usually are.
Let you roll with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's why to think that you just let it. That's what I love about doing this because it's just how someone's mind, the creative side of them works. And it stems back to imagination, like we were talking earlier, right?
Exactly.
Like as kids, I've loved it. Now kids today, they don't really do that anymore that I see. But
I've seen my kids do it. But yeah, I think because they've had these other kinds of interactive experiences, notably video games.
Yes.
But a lot of the games my kids play, they're also online. They're on Discord. They're communicating with their friends or the other people. So there's an interactive component that goes beyond just interacting with the game as well.
Right.
It's easy for somebody my age to dismiss what the kids are doing, but I'm not sure that it's dismissible. I think it's just different. You know,
Yeah, right. I mean,
yeah, they didn't grow up doing a lot of the stuff I did, but they did some of it. I mean, when they were little, we played a lot of imagination games. You know, we would pretend to take voyages on my hammock, and
well, yeah. There's that aspect of it, but when they get to
yeah,
a certain age, like you said, video games. But you're right. I mean, I can remember back when I was in middle school, keyboarding class. Right,
mm,
I had a computer. Well, my aunt had a computer that I got to play on, and I was like far more advanced typing than everyone else because I was playing on the computer and
right,
playing these games. And there was no Discord or communication like this at the time. It was all, well, instant messenger or AOL, like you said
sure,
earlier, all
sure.
them things. Did you ever meet up with any authors like through like a message board? Were you on any of that kind of media back then?
The only message boards I did, honestly, I naively subscribed to one about archaeology, where I
Okay.
spent a lot of time arguing with people that were nuts. And at a certain point, and I was living in Seattle. I was trying to write a lot of books, and it was just a thing that kept me getting from being productive, right?
Yeah.
So at a certain point, I just shut that down. I'm like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And I still am kind of in that mode on the internet. I'm on AOL, I'm on Instagram. I don't argue with anybody about anything.
Right.
It's a waste of my time. I don't see the
Energy.
point. It's a drain on my, because when I was doing it, I was not only spending time replying to these people, I was spending a lot of the rest of my time when I wasn't on the keyboard thinking about how I would reply to them, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, no, this is not what I need to be thinking about. This isn't
No.
making me happy. This isn't not making me well, and it's not helping me get anything done. So I finally managed to sort of cut that out of my life. So now I use Facebook to share pictures, my kids doing stuff with my older relatives. Um, Instagram, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing on there, but I have fun with it. Um,
Yeah.
but I
Good.
just don't. Hmm?
All in good fun. All
But
in.
back then, no. But I've hooked up in person with authors all
Yeah.
the time. I went to a lot of conventions. Um, there are conventions like that are specific to media, but there's also a World Fantasy Convention, for instance. Is this big fantasy convention that I started going to before I was published because it's a business con. Almost, it's kind of expensive. There are no costumes, and everybody there is a professional of some kind. They're an agent, an editor, a writer, a wannabe writer. Everybody there is sort of networking. In fact,
Mm,
that's where I got the agent that I still have, was at a World Fantasy Convention.
that's
That's where I
awesome.
met a lot of these people I still work with, and a lot of the writer friends I have. I met at those conventions, because there's a lot of time. Those conventions are not so much about panels as about hanging out in the bar. You know,
Right. Getting to mingle.
yeah, mingling, getting to know people, exchanging ideas, making connections. Um, so even before that, when I lived in Athens, Georgia, in the in the early '80s. Well, no, the late '80s, and I had two friends there that were published already, and one of them was um, at the time uh, known as Poppy Z. Bright, wrote vampire fiction,
Okay.
published their first novel at like 21. Um,
Jeez.
and I would have coffee with her about once a month, and we would talk about writing. And then I had another friend, Tom Dietz, who unfortunately is now passed on, but he wrote kind of young adult fantasy fiction set in the North Georgia mountains. And he and I were much better friends, and he read a lot of my early manuscripts. So, like, getting feedback from that community is something I've always tried to do, you know. Um,
Yeah, it's helpful, beneficial.
and back then, there were it was already difficult to get published just by throwing a book into the mix, right? Now it's sort of impossible, I think, like without having some kind of connection, some kind of unless you self-publish, and that, again, that was not a thing back when I started.
Right.
And there are a lot more small publishers now, which is cool when you're trying to break in. But back then it was, a handful of big New York publishers mostly, and was already becoming very difficult. I mean, because those editors were getting like 6,000 manuscripts a year.
Yeah.
How do you parse through that? Who knows how many really awesome books never even got read?
Yeah, kind of got overlooked.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think that. And it's also impressive, like you mentioned earlier, that you had to knock out some material in a few weeks or a month. I mean, your shortest. I mean, that's crazy to think that you can do that, but it's impressive as hell. I just want to say that too, because I can't even imagine. Like, I don't have no talent for any of that. I don't have no gift. I wanted to be a rock star. That didn't pan out. I'd play. You play an instrument too, right? You play a little guitar.
I played guitar, since I was a kid, and more recently, I've actually started playing. Actually, I've got one right here.
Oh, here we go.
That's a
look
tenor
at that.
ukulele.
Yeah.
Just because I can do it's a little different. It wires my brain a little differently. It's kind of fun. I still play guitar a lot. I also played flute and various flute-like instruments like recorders and penny whistles and things like that. So, I was never. I mean, I actually was also in a band. My wife and I were both in a band when we lived in Athens. Like,
really?
during the period when REM was hitting it big, and there were a lot of possibilities to play in Athens at the time. So, if you're willing to be out till like 2 or 3 in the morning, which we were young, right? We had a lot of fun. I never really thought we were going to go anywhere, and we didn't. But some other people in our band had higher ambitions, and that eventually led to us breaking up. But we were having fun, getting a little money for it, So why not just go blue?
I don't know. The aliens are coming, weird. I guess. That is. I don't know.
What?
That's true. I said the aliens are coming, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't do anything. I didn't touch anything.
Yeah, I don't. Huh. Well, so is there any other projects that you're working on that you want to put out there or that you can talk about or speak about?
Well, I think I'm kind of excited about the novelization of the Godzilla Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire. I think it's going to be, the movie's good. I like it. But I'm really excited about The Wind That Sweeps the Stars, which is it's a standalone novel. It's not part of a series. It's just like one book. I started writing it really to entertain my daughter initially. And then I thought, no, I can do something with this. So I kind of wrote it on what's called spec. Like usually these days, I'll go to a publisher and say, I want to write a book. Here's what it's going to be about. And they're like either yes or no. But this one I just started writing, purely writing. I didn't even outline it at all. And it kind of harkens back to a lot of the stuff I was playing with in my first novels, like Native American and Central Asian mythology and magic, and so a little outside of the mainstream of a lot of what I've done in the past few years. And it's basically about this woman who is married. She's from sort of barbarian tribe, or that's how they seem. She's married to the prince of this empire, and we find out pretty quickly, like in chapter 1, that the reason she's agreed to this is so that she could kill everybody.
Oh, wow. That's
um,
that's a way to
but
start her off.
yeah, she's actually, um, you know, they all see her as this dumb little effectiveless, ugly, scrawny barbarian, but she's actually there to kill everybody. So, and wacky hijinks ensue from there.
Wow, that sounds good. Sounds interesting. And when do you when is this planned to
That's April 9th, I think, is the release date from it right now. It's already up, like on all the
on your
digital websites.
platforms? Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's up on Amazon. It's up on Barnes and Nobles. It's all
Let the
those
pre-order.
platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
Okay.
being published by the same publisher, Titan Books, which is the British publisher I was talking about earlier. And they published a book of mine called The Basilisk Throne last year, which I also have a lot of fun writing. It's not related to this book or actually to any of my other fiction. So I find it's a good balance. I like writing licensed stuff. I also like writing original stuff. It's two different processes. There's two different outcomes,
Right.
Uh,
A little
so
more free reign on your own. Like you
yeah,
said, you kind of let your story unfold, which is so cool.
right. Yeah. I'm able to work in a somewhat different way. But
Right.
what I often relate writing a Star Wars book or a Godzilla book or something like that. If it's a novelization, that's one thing, right? You're just strictly taking what happens in the movie and making a book out of it as best you can. But I've also done tie-in novels, which are so I did tie-in novels for instance, the Planet of the Apes franchise, where I'm writing books set between movies that aren't featured in the movies, and that's again a different process. Um, but there's a lot more oversight there, and I enjoy it, and I think of it. There are limitations. There are things you can and can't do, and that was true in Star Wars as well. There are things that you absolutely were forbidden from doing, and
Right.
sometimes there are weird things, like you could you were allowed to say, um, "Look over there," said Luke, but you couldn't say, "Look over there," Luke said, or I can't remember which. One of those orders was
One of
not.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also, we were not supposed to ever mention uh, at that time a soul. Like Star Wars people don't have souls per se, right?
Mm.
Or they
Mm-hmm.
didn't at that point. We were told that a new invention is never going to solve the problem. It's always going to come from people. Like it's going to always come from it, heroic impulses from people rising up to the challenge. It's never going to be because you invent this new widget that destroys the enemy,
Yeah.
because that's not what Star Wars is about. It's about spirit triumphing over whatever. But I always have said that writing license work is like writing a haiku, right? With a haiku, you know how many syllables are allowed and what order they have to be in, and in some ways that can be very grounding and can help you write something really good. Having
Yeah.
structure is not bad.
Right.
Having structure imposed on you is not bad. It makes you think about how I'm going to do something inside of this structure. But it's also fun just to let go wild at times as well. So,
Yeah. Let it loose.
yep.
I mean, we've kind of jumped all over the place, really, and conversation led that way from the things you answered a lot of what I was inquiring about, you know, process of, movie novelization and how you tie things in or creating your own realm and world and how that develops. I haven't read them, but you did some short story work too for Emissary of the Void. I believe they were in like the gaming
Yeah.
magazines or something.
Yeah. Star Wars Gamer, I think is where it started. They actually ended up being in a couple of different magazines. So, um, yeah, when I was living in Seattle, I got to know some of the people at Wizards of the Coast and a guy named Dave Gross, who was an editor. He worked for Wizards of the Coast at the time. But there's a whole community there. There's a huge science fiction fantasy community there. But anyway, yeah, I was tapped to do some short stories that would be related to the New Jedi Order, that would take place during the New Jedi Order, but would not feature really any of the major characters. And as I said earlier, I had been reading some of those young adult and kids books, and there was a character named Oldir. He was featured in some of those books, who desperately wanted to be a Jedi, but he just didn't have the aptitude for it. And he was kind of a screw up character. He created problems that had to be solved by the young Jedi. He wasn't a bad guy, his heart was in the right place, sort of. And in the end, he decided that he could help. He wanted to help people, so he would be a rescue pilot, right? So I thought, well, why don't I age Aldir up, and make him a rescue pilot, and he make him a rescue pilot during the period of the Yuuzhan Vong purge of the Jedi, like the second big Jedi purge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun because I got to invent a Jedi, Quinn Fahey, and she was a lot of fun to write. Aldir was a lot of fun to write. He had this motley crew of his, and of course he was a rescue pilot, but he was also working against the Vong, right? So his job had taken on a new dimension now that the Vong were there. Before he was just like, if a ship was stranded or out of oxygen or whatever, he would deal with that. But so they were a lot of fun, and they were written as serial. So a new installment came out every month, which was also kind of cool. I'd never done that before.
Yeah.
And that's something that harkens directly back to the beginnings of science fiction and fantasy. Well, a lot of what we think of started as serials and magazines. So that was yeah, and I still hear about those. People are still finding those to read. I think mostly online at this point. I've got the the magazines, I guess, because I got them at the time. Yeah.
You still have all your original.
Yeah. But it's, stuff that's happening in the cracks of what the big events. These are smaller events, right? But they're nevertheless important. And you can see some things about what's going on. So
yeah, I've tried to look for them. I know you can purchase stuff through eBay and stuff, but sometimes some of the material for Star Wars is hard to find. I mean,
yeah, for a while there, they were readily available on some website. But yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with it now. I feel like I looked for it maybe a year ago because I had somebody asking about it, and I couldn't find the complete. I found a lot of references to them, but I couldn't find the stories.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, they're important to the. I mean, if you want a fuller experience of what's going on, and like you said, you got to create, and that was probably really fun too, because you got to play in a realm where you could add to it on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't violate any of the Star Wars conventions. Well, right. I couldn't alter the greater story arc, right? I couldn't do anything that would have to be referred to in the other books. But yeah, it was just its own little story set in the backdrop of the bigger one, and I quite enjoyed it. Short stories are kind of, I tried to publish short stories before I wrote novels. I would write a short story, I would submit it, and back then, and probably still now, but back then there was a limited number of markets that published short stories. There was a book that you could get at the library in the reference section called The Writer's Market that would tell you who bought what kind of short stories. Like, so if you write in science fiction and fantasy, there were just a few magazines, and they would tell you what their writer's guidelines were. Like, does this have to be double space or spaced in half, or how do you format the pages? Everything was laid out like that. And I would write these short stories and I would send them off, and you would always start. You're always supposed to start with the top of the market, the people that paid the most, and they paid by the word.
Mm.
Like so, I would always start at the top of the market, and everything I read said, and they're not going to buy it. They don't know who you are. You're going to fail. So after you try to sell it to the top of the market, then you go down to the next one, and you keep
Keep
working your way down until somebody buys it. But what I would do is would write one, send it to the top of the market. They would reject it. I would say, these idiots don't recognize that I'm a genius, because I was 20. I would stick it in the drawer and never look at it again. But what I didn't appreciate at the time was that the editors that were reading these stories were giving me real feedback. They would tell me in a letter, sometimes 2 or 3 pages long, more often more like a page. They wouldn't just tell me it was rejected. They would tell me why. It was, it was feedback
Yeah,
that
that's
I could
good.
use if I could see past my own hurt feelings, that I could use to write a better story. And at that time, I was not really seeing that, and I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I'm just not a short story writer. Maybe I should just write novels. And there's some truth in that, because it's easier to finish a short story. So a lot more people finish short stories. So there are more short stories in circulation that editors have to deal with than novels.
Yeah.
But what also happened to me during that period of time was that I was in graduate school, and I was learning how to write academic prose. And I learned a lot from my major professor, who was very no nonsense about explaining to me what I was doing wrong and what I was doing right. And I, in essence, learned to really take constructive criticism. And unless you really are a rare sort of genius, which most people are not, and I certainly am not, you really do need you need constructive criticism.
Yeah.
And not all criticism is constructive. Like, I actually stayed away from writers groups. I stayed away from other unpublished writers, because sometimes their own feelings were, it was more about like, well, this is how I would write this story, right? It was not always. Yeah, thank you. My wife just brought me something to drink.
Well, tell her I said hello.
He says hello.
Hello.
Um, and so I, in those days, I stayed away from other unpublished authors, and I took my advice from published authors who no longer had their egos in the same place mine was, and from editors, that were used to dealing with authors of all kinds, and we're not shy about. I mean, if you're going to be a successful editor, you have to be able to tell the author what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, right? Or at least what you think is right and wrong. So learning to take constructive criticism was a huge step for me, and propelled me on to actually successfully writing books that got published.
Well, that's good that you realize that, at a younger age, because I think a lot of that's important, constructive criticism, but it's the mindset on how you take it, right? Like, if you're going to be, well, screw you, man, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm writing this piece or whatever you're working on, and even like you were talking about outlines, how sometimes you create outlines. I make outlines for doing this. I'm nobody perfect. I'm just having fun, want to have real conversations, and I get inspired by hearing your guys' stories, and it's just interesting to me. But like all week long leading up to this, in my head, there'll be moments where I'm having a conversation with you.
Right.
And you're, at that moment, it's like, oh, I'd love to talk to you right now because it's perfect. But then you forget about it, or you move on to something else.
Right.
Just like books. Like, when I read a book, it sticks with me for a while. But Mr. Stewart had a good analogy. It's almost kind of like a dream. Some people can remember things to a T. Like, it's insane. And then moments later, you just forget it. And that's kind of how I am. So I look at reading books as a dream. I'm living that experience right now. while I'm reading it, and it's so epic and fun. And plus, it takes you away. It's a good thing.
Yeah, that's what I enjoyed about reading hugely when I was a kid. It took me outside of where I was. Not that where I was, it was ever awful. I didn't have a bad or an abusive childhood. I actually had a pretty interesting one. But, um, I think boredom is an important part of being a kid. Like
Yeah,
work, finding ways to fill your time, um, reading or creating or whatever, playing. Um,
yeah,
that's where a lot of our creativity comes from. It's just like I got to do something. I can see that with my kids too. Both my kids, my youngest, both of my kids have gone to Savannah Arts Academy, which is a public school, but it's an arts academy. You actually have to audition to get in.
mm,
And my youngest, Rosemary, is my oldest Archer um, is a musician, so he was in there for band. But my youngest does painting and drawing and sculpting,
that's
and
cool.
she's always doing that. I mean, whatever else is happening, and she may have YouTube running and be watching one of her YouTube shows, but she's also going to be only half paying attention to that while she paints or
Paint. Yeah.
sculpts or draws. Um, so she's sort of always bored, but she's always working as well. So
Tinkering with something. Yeah.
yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Actually, I was just having this conversation yesterday with one of my friends stopped over to visit. And I was talking about how he was having Wi-Fi problems at his house or the internet was out. And I'm like, man, it's crazy how that has it. We're all attached to it now because
Mhm.
if we have issues here, my kids have no idea what to do. No idea. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, but they're at that teenage boy age where they're just, I don't know. But we play board games, Monopoly. We've been playing Monopoly a lot lately, which can turn into a ridiculously long game.
We've played board games. We also play D&D with my brother. My brother's in
Oh,
Chicago actually. So we play D&D via Discord, and there's a really good D&D app called Roll20 that he can use. He's DMing, so he can use that to throw up maps and things
oh,
on a screen. So we've got a monitor on the table, two monitors actually, one just so I can see him and the other people that play with us, and one so I can see the maps he throws up. Um, so yeah, this that sort of analog. I mean, I guess that's a analog / digital marriage, but it's still a very analog game, and we still are keeping track of stuff on our end with pencil and paper and
paper.
rolling dice, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Savannah, we frequently lose power here. I mean, the electrical infrastructure is kind of not so good. We're not far above sea level, so most of the cables aren't buried, right? So there's a high wind or squirrels that are a little too active. We lose power all the time. So it's not that they love it when we lose power, um, and they lose the ability to use the internet or whatever, but they're mostly okay with it. Like there are other things that they will do
Yeah.
when that happens. But given their preferences, my son will play TF2. Are you familiar with TF2?
Hmm. No, I
Team
don't think
Fortress
so.
2. It's actually kind of
Oh,
an old game.
that's old. That's an old
Yeah, he
game.
plays it. He plays it religiously, and then lately he's been playing um, what's it called? Elden Ring,
Oh, the
like
new
the
the new
stuff
one.
in the Dark Souls universe. Yeah. My daughter more likes stuff like Animal Crossing, like the cozy
Yeah.
games. And they both, of course, played Minecraft like crazy. Um, uh, but
Yeah.
anyway, I often my
He's
son actually, rather than all watching a movie together, he'll just come down and play Elden Ring for a couple hours and watch him play,
yeah. I
or whatever he's playing at the time. He was also playing a game called Persona. Are you familiar with?
My kids probably are. I'm
Yeah.
an old. If I don't game much anymore, but I was more of the RPG role playing, Final Fantasy style, World of Warcraft. That was kind of my.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did the last game I played a lot of was Elder Scrolls because I wrote books for
Yeah,
that.
you wrote the book. Yeah. Yep.
Right. But first, I had to audition the game because I had not played it. So um, yeah. In fact, back when Neverwinter Nights was a thing,
Yeah, that
I
was
not only
huge.
played it, but I figured out how to use the tool set was very user friendly, so you could create your own
Yep.
adventures. So my brother and I would create these Neverwinter Night adventures for each other.
That's
But
yeah. You still get your game on. That's good to hear.
yeah,
That's good to hear.
I've been playing
Do you,
D&D since we were teenagers, right? So
you watch? Have you watched Stranger Things? You part of the Hellfire Club?
yeah. That was kind of fun. I didn't see Stranger Things immediately because we didn't have Netflix, but I've seen it all now,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Um, so
Fantastic.
yeah, it's awesome. Now we got several streaming services. We watch a lot of streaming these
Yeah.
days.
Yep. That's
But
that's what there is.
yeah, and some
My
of it's
wife.
really really good. A lot of it's really good actually.
Yeah.
So uh, way better than TV. TV has just gotten much better than it used to be.
Yes. 100%. My wife and I were watching the show Downton Abbey. Have you
Yeah,
heard
yeah, I've
heard of that?
seen
Yeah.
all of that.
We're on the final season. We're late to the game, but we're really enjoying. That's a fantastic show.
Yeah, I liked
A
it.
lot of
Yeah, right
lot of
now
good
my wife
history.
and I are watching Ahsoka.
I was gonna ask you. Well, that's good. Segue right into that. Are you keeping up with the Star Wars shows and such?
Yeah, more as a fan now. I mean, I haven't written Star Wars in a long time, and I was dragged. So I'll be honest. Like when the prequels first came out, I didn't like them. Right, uh, like I found a lot of fault with them, and to the point that when my son was little, I was showing him A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and all that, and he asked if there were any other movies, and I would just say no.
Hmm.
But then at some point, we were at my brother's house, and my brother had all the prequels, and he's like, "Well, have you seen the prequels?" And my son's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Fine, show him the prequels." And then I realized watching them that they had aged well for me. Like I liked them a lot better. I was a lot less critical of them, and my son loved them. And so, I mean, to this day, his favorite, the character he cosplays most often is Revenge of the Sith, Anakin.
Oh,
He's got an
nice.
awesome look for that. But so so the answer is yes. Largely because my kids were so into it, and it was interesting to see that. Like, because I didn't have kids until I was in my 40s. So my kids and I are really separated in time from
Yeah,
the
yeah,
stuff that I liked when I was a kid.
yeah,
And to find that they still think New Hope is a good movie, that's cool. That says something about the franchise, and so I have liked a lot of the TV stuff quite a lot. Mandalorian is a hoot. Um, was really fun to watch. Eh, um, I mean, I've liked all of it. Some of it more than others,
right.
but
Same here.
Andor I thought was fantastic. It was a really different take on the whole thing.
Yeah.
Kind of more grown up, kind of more hard edged, but still really good. Um, Ahsoka, I actually had not seen all those. I had not seen the animated shows that like predate that.
Clone Wars and Rebels.
Clone Wars, I had not really seen those.
Yeah.
So I went into Ahsoka not quite knowing what I was watching, but now I'm pretty much there with it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, they did a good job with that. So you don't
yeah,
really have to know all the
right.
other like the animated stuff. I will say at first I was really bummed out with Andor just because first, now I rewatched it, and I think it's fantastic. I looked at it at a different standpoint.
Right.
But it's a dark show, like you said.
It is
It's
a
like,
dark show. And for Star Wars, it's very dark. Not
yeah,
unlike not unlike Rogue One, right?
right,
Um, which was super dark, but I liked it. I wouldn't want all Star Wars to go that way. I
right,
mean, I like it when it's, I think even though this last season of Mandalorian was a little off, I think Mandalorian hit a lot of high notes for me, like a lot of really good notes for me
yeah,
in terms of feeling like Star Wars, right? Um, and Ahsoka's good; it's getting pretty good.
yeah. Well, I won't
Uh,
spoil it for you. It's good.
I just finished episode 4. We got a late start on that.
Yeah,
There's some things that I just watch by myself, and there's certain things I want to either watch with some of my kids or my wife. And the the TV, the Marvel and Star Wars television shows are something that my wife and I watch together. So I have to wait till she's available and
she's ready.
awake. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
So
Oh, hold on one.
still blue.
Yeah, that's weird. Maybe
Is
it's
it
the
still
camera.
glitchy?
Are you on a laptop or a computer?
I'm on a laptop.
Yeah, maybe that could be why. Maybe if you
It's
give it
just weird
one of
that it
your,
did it halfway through. You know what I mean? Like it
yeah,
was fine at first.
yeah. Can you like? It almost changed like once you put your guitar back down. Then that's when it
Yeah,
all
I don't think
happened.
I touched anything there.
Oh well, that's all right. As long, I mean, I'm okay
Yeah.
with it. I just want you to be happy too. Um, we were talking about Ahsoka. Yeah, it's great. I was really impressed with it. I think Dave Filoni's doing and John Favreau are doing a great job with
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
all the work that they've been putting in.
Yeah. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's fun to see more content like that, and pretty well done. Sometimes fantastically well done, but its worst is still okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's good. I'm just glad we're still getting content. And I can imagine, like you grew up with the original trilogy, like in pivotal moment of your life, and it was a big influence on you, and it was amazing. I could see how the prequels probably didn't do it for you because it just a lot of people kind of say that, but over time, also Star Wars seems to grow and change on people that didn't like certain things.
Oddly enough, I didn't have any problem with the sequels, and I think part of that was because I realized that trying to figure out how to put this,
Sure.
that the sort of the hating I did on the prequels was not only not really called for, it to a certain extent was, why am I doing this? You know what I mean? If why am I putting this kind of energy into not liking something? Um,
Yeah.
and so when I saw some of the reactions to some of from some quarters to the sequels, I was like, well, I think, yeah, they're not exactly the same. They're different, but there's never going to be another New Hope. In fact, if you think about it, New Hope is the only Star Wars that's canon.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, everything else, because I'm convinced, thoroughly convinced, just from what I know about the franchise and from watching the movies at that point, that if in A New Hope, Vader was not his father, Leia was not his sister. Nobody had come up with that yet, right?
Yeah.
That was nobody thought there would be another movie. I mean, I think that they thought this is it. We're going to make this one movie and it's going to flop and that we're done. And it didn't. And it was great. But immediately things started cropping in that didn't necessarily make sense. But it's not. I know canon's important, but it's only so important. Enjoying
Right.
it, having a good movie, a good story, and whether in 1976, for instance, before the movie came out, Lucas intended for Vader to be Luke's father is not important. What's important is that made the storyline better, right?
Right.
When you made that decision.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, I in terms of the sequels, I was just happy to finally see more content at that point. You know,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Well, just like you were saying before about all this negative energy you're putting towards something, it really is just a waste. Why let's be positive about things. I know canon is a huge deal, or the expanding universe compared to, the Disney buyout and all that. I was never involved in any of that at that time. I can understand where people are coming from, how they were affected or hurt because they grew up reading this material and so forth. But you can still like it all. I mean, it's Star Wars.
yeah, I mean, I was involved in it, right?
And
And
you were a part of it, right?
I was a part of it, but I don't feel left behind because I understand how storytelling works. And you couldn't have made a series of movies that just sort of followed what happened in the expanded universe because there would be no surprises there, right? I like the fact, I think it's super cool they're working Thrawn in, right? But it's not the way Thrawn was in the expanded universe.
In the books, right?
Yeah. And, I never expected that if there were going to be sequels that they would, I mean, they largely ignored the expanded universe when they did the prequels. I mean, like Boba Fett's backstory was changed completely. And that was true of a lot of stuff about the Jedi and everything else. But again, first of all, who am I to second guess Lucas, right? I mean, it's his thing.
It was
So
his.
if he wanted,
Yeah.
it was his thing anyway. It was his thing then, and the simple fact is that, and I think the reason my son liked the prequels is that they're beautiful. They're full of action. You get to see people do stuff with lightsabers you never dreamed of seeing them do, in the first three movies, because frankly, the special effects weren't there yet.
Right.
And there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. Some of the storylines leave me a little cold, but again, it's not War and Peace. It's
Yeah.
not meant to be.
No.
And most people don't read War and Peace anyway. So
It's fun. I just seen something about that the other day. It's crazy you just brought that up. Now I'm trying to remember. You put me on the spot with that one. Yeah, that's another novel there, boy. But yeah, you're right. I love it all. I try to bring positivity to it all. I think it's great. It's what we all love. Unfortunately, it's people can think what they want, but I'm not gonna be a hater.
Absolutely. Yeah, people are completely entitled to their opinions.
Right. I agree 100%. Well, what was your initial thought when you heard that George was selling it? Like, did that?
I don't think it had that much impact on me at that point. At that point, it felt like that Disney was eventually going to own everything anyway. You know what I mean? That was part of a trend. It's part of a trend. Like I actually, at this point, looking back, I don't remember if they acquired Marvel first or Star Wars. I think it was Marvel first, right?
I believe
but
so.
It doesn't matter. Like a lot of these things I grew up with were being kind of gobbled up by Disney, which, it's certainly not all bad. I don't know what would have happened if they hadn't done it. So I guess I was, for him, like I said, who am I really to second guess him as a creator? If he decided the time to let go of it had come, I doubt it had anything to do with the money, right?
Right.
It was probably just more of where he was at that point.
Yeah.
In terms of whether I thought that Disney would make good movies, I don't know that I mean, Disney has over the years made some really good movies, and they've made some that,
Right.
I certainly grew up with Disney movies.
Same here.
So do my kids, huh?
Yep.
So do
I
my
said same
kids. So
here. Yep.
I don't have anything against Disney on that front, you know. Uh, so yeah, I guess ultimately I didn't really have any strong feelings about it. I just kind of wait and see attitude.
Right. Yeah, it didn't really affect me either.
Yeah.
I immediately thought, oh, okay, we're gonna get some new movies.
Then
That's what
maybe if
was
I thought
my
anything, I felt bad because it had been a long time.
yeah.
It'd been a long time, you know. So
And
if it meant
I feel like now they're kind of I don't know. It's like we're all ready for another movie, but it's like you keep hearing different things and things are getting pushed back. And I think maybe who knows? I don't know from some of the negative feedback that the sequels got, maybe some, directors maybe are a little gun shy, we'll say.
I certainly think there are probably actors that are going to shy.
That too,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, because some of the actors got some of the worst of it. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I right now I'm not connected to any of that.
Right.
Um,
I just was curious of your thoughts. I mean, just
yeah,
fun talk, fun talk.
I'm just kind of at this point approaching it just as a fan, and
Yeah.
uh, willing to give pretty much anything that they do a shot. So
Yeah. Same here. Have you seen the trailer for the Rebel Dawn? That Netflix.
yeah, it's interesting. I was initially tapped to do that.
Really?
Yeah, to do a novelization of that. Um, well, okay, let me back up.
All right.
Nobody ever told me that's what it was. Okay, they said there's this new project, and they kind of laid out some information about it. And would you be interested in doing the novelization of this? And I thought, I bet I know what that is. And so I did a little more research, and I'm like, yeah, I know what this is. And so I said, yeah. And then they sort of made a decision that they would like to get like a female writer to do it instead of me. And I was like, yeah, that's totally what I think it is because it's got a female lead,
Yep.
and they want somebody that will bring something to that I might not. So I was okay with that. Um, and I told my editors, yeah, if this is what I think it is, I understand why they might want to go that way. And he was apologizing because he had offered it to me in good faith, thinking that I would get it. And I said, yeah, no worries. And he said he told me it probably is what you think it is. So I kind of excited to see it.
Yeah. Me too. Like I'm pretty pumped for that. I mean, Zack Snyder is pretty talented.
Yeah,
When
yeah. I think it could be potentially really good. So
yeah. I think I'm not sure. Does it come out later this month? Like the first couple
I
episodes?
think they just pushed it
Pushed it
this
back a
way.
little.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think they. No, I mean I think it's coming out earlier
Oh,
than they said it was going to come out. Like I think
really?
I feel like I saw something like that on my news feed this morning.
Ah. Yeah,
So,
I haven't messed
but I
around
didn't
on my
read the
stuff.
article. I was like I said, I got up a little later this morning than I usually get up, so I was like drinking my coffee and going through my stuff and talking to my wife and getting ready to talk to you. So I didn't read everything I might normally have read,
Yeah.
but I feel like they said that was coming out earlier than they planned. So
Yeah, I just
which
found out he actually was lived in just an hour away from where I'm at.
oh
A
okay.
little fun fact. I mean, it's interesting. But you were gonna say something and I cut you off. I apologize.
I've forgotten what it might have been.
Yeah.
Probably not
I
important.
I have those moments all the time, so no worries there. Yeah, I'm excited for that. I'm looking forward to seeing that show. I think it's gonna be good. Um yeah, that's this has been fun. I'm just blown away I get to talk with you, sir. The
So
stories, it's true. You've
even
made an
even purple,
impact.
even purple.
Even purple, yeah. Well, the Vong, maybe they're
Yeah,
messing
yeah.
around. They're coming back. I'm excited to read your the final prophecy when I get there. I'm excited to. I'm working my way along. I would have loved to talk to you about that novel too, but maybe we can do this another time later on down the line
Sure,
because
yeah.
it's been
I
fun.
mean, if you have any, if you have follow ups too, I work at home. I have responsibilities like with my kids, and I do most of the
Right.
cooking and all that. And at times have to work all day, and other times I'm free all day. So,
Cool.
um,
It's good to know.
so it's just,
Yeah. Well, we got contact information, and yeah, I hope your novel. Another. I want to give a shout out to another gentleman I speak to. I don't know. He's very mysterious. But Zazane is a big fan of Conquest. So I just wanted to tell you that and
hmm,
pass that along to
okay.
you. So he didn't know I was doing this. I try to keep everything low profile with my followers or YouTube viewers, but I know they'll be excited for this because the new Jedi Order is, like I said, very, very popular, which I know you're well aware of. And so far, you're the first one on the list that I got to. And
It's
I,
kind of
I
cool that it's popular this many years out. It's always nice to see see that. Um, and I think it really speaks to some of the people they got to write for it, and having a plan. It wasn't a perfect plan. They didn't have everything worked out, but they did have a plan. And it was that collaboration between Lucasfilms and the publisher and the writers. And I say plural, right? Because oftentimes three or four of us would get on a conference call, right? Because that's what we had then, and hash things out. Like, this is what's happening in my book. What's how would that affect your book? And we were communicating in a way that I think was kind of rare, especially in licensed work up until that point.
mm, yeah. Well, that's good that
So
you all came together and created something that. And I know it's been. I believe your books came out in 2001. I,
I
2003 was
yeah, I think, I mean, I started them in the late '90s. I think I was contracted in the late '90s, but if I remember correctly, I moved to Savannah from Seattle right around that time, and I think the books, I actually wrote all those books here, but it was in the first year or two that I was here.
that. Yeah.
So yeah, really early 2000s.
Well, they're still catching on. So I mean, all these years later, I just look. I'm a perfect example. I just read them recently, last month. So
I meet people all the time. I went to a Star Wars convention in Charleston a few months back, well, back in May, and was really blown away. And I got a lot of follows on Instagram that are like big Jedi Order fans. So
well,
it's interesting, kind of cool.
good. Yeah. Well, sir, thank you again so much for hanging out with me and talking and
Yeah, well,
sharing your
thanks for having me.
stories.
It's
Yeah,
fun.
and maybe when I get down the line, I'll get a hold of you and we'll catch back up here. But
All right, that'd be
there you
great.
have it, folks. Mr. Greg Keys. I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned
I
and
did.
till next time. See you guys soon.